Welcome to my April wrap-up. I read 4 books and DNF'd 1 in the month of April. I read 2 fantasy, 1 science fiction, and 1 nonfiction, and then the book that I DNF'd was a fantasy. So I will go through them in the order that I read them this month. Starting off with The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year, and unfortunately it is one of my most disappointing books of the year. It was fine. It was fine, but it was not everything that I expected it to be. So The Familiar is about this girl who is growing up. She is a Jewish girl in Spain in the 1600s during the Spanish Inquisition, and she has magical abilities. So it is a historical fantasy, which I have been drawn to historical fantasies. I have really liked the historical fantasies that I've read, but this was not it for me. Part of the problem is this is Leigh Bardugo, and while I've not read her Alex Stern books, I have read her Grishaverse books, and this book felt very similar to her Grishaverse books. I was reading it going, this is a Alina and the Darkling alternate universe. We literally had several plot beats that were followed that were just like, this is an alternate version of Alina and the Darkling. And that was disappointing to me. It felt like I knew where the story was going. The story felt very familiar. The other thing about this book is I felt like the characters weren't as well fleshed out. They felt fairly one-dimensional, like they had one personality trait and that was it. And that's kind of what carried the story. And I kind of felt that way about pretty much all of the characters, but particularly our main character. And that might be why I felt like I never really got into the characters as well. I kind of felt like I was being held at arm's length from these characters because I don't know, I guess I never like really understood their personalities, their motivations, etc. It was still, I guess, it was fine to read. I didn't DNF it. I enjoyed it enough. The writing is very beautiful. There are a lot of quotes that I pulled from the book that I was just like, oh, that's a really good quote. Let's see if I can pull one up. There were several quotes that I thought were like really good that were written in this book. Like Leigh Bardugo, I enjoy her writing. And this quote, I feel like I haven't actually seen, I guess what is the quotes that people aren't quoting from this book, but I feel like this might be one of them. Louisa saw her reflection in the goblet, changed but unchanged, made perfect and ruined all the same. But at the same time, it also kind of reminds me of the Grishaverse, where we have the quote, I am not ruined, I am ruination. So I don't know, like, I guess I want to say if you like the Grishaverse, you'll probably like this, but at the same time, I like the Grishaverse, and I kind of felt disappointed by this, but maybe that's because I had too high of expectations going into it. I don't know. But moving on to the next book that I read in April, I read The Mona Lisa Vanishes. So this was actually the group read for middle grade March, and I intended to read it in March for the group read, and here I am finishing it in April. I did start it right at the end of March, and then it carried over into April. I thought this was really good. I learned a lot about the Mona Lisa, and honestly, sometimes I like middle grade nonfiction, particularly if the middle grade nonfiction is like a little bit more in depth, because I learn a lot from it without going like as in depth as an adult nonfiction book might. So this was like a really good summary of the events that happened surrounding the Mona Lisa. And I like that about middle grade nonfiction. So the Mona Lisa wasn't actually famous until the Mona Lisa was stolen from an art museum. And then the press about the Mona Lisa being stolen is what made the Mona Lisa so famous. And I didn't know none of that, but I don't really know art history, I'll be honest. So it was really cool to read this. So this book alternated between like the Mona Lisa's creation. So it told like how the Mona Lisa got painted, and then it flipped to the timeline of the Mona Lisa stolen and the news releases and things going on and leading up to the Mona Lisa being found again. So we kind of had like these two timelines in the story and would like flip back and forth between them. And I thought that was a really nice way of talking about the Mona Lisa and, you know, its significance and just its creation, how the Mona Lisa was created in the first place, and then also talking about the, I guess the heist, it's not a heist story, the theft of the Mona Lisa and its rediscovery. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good, you know, summary of everything that was going on. And if you're interested in, I guess, art history, the Mona Lisa, etc., I wouldn't even say that I'm particularly interested in any of those things, but I enjoyed this book, so I would recommend. Next book I tried reading was Can't Spell Treason Without T, so I had the audiobook arc of this one, or advanced reader copy, and I got about halfway through it and I bailed. I like cozy fantasy. So I was expecting this to be similar to Legends and Lattes. The pitch is very similar to Legends and Lattes. We have two characters. One of them is a Queen's Guard, and the other one is like a prominent magic mage user who, I forget her role. That's how important her role is to the story. And both of them want to just quit their jobs and open a tea shop and a bookshop, a bookshop and tea shop combo. And that sounds great. And it sounds honestly quite similar to Legends and Lattes. But this book really did not focus on the tea shop and the bookshop at all. Like, the tea shop and the bookshop is like up and running off page. It's like they found a place, they're like, this is perfect. And then off page, they renovate it. And then on page, we're like, oh, this is up and running. Okay. Also, our two main characters are in a relationship, and they have been for 2 years at the start of this story, which is fine in some ways. I was like actually kind of happy to see that, because I feel like often relationships are the falling in love stage. So I'm actually like happy to see characters that are further along in the relationship. But oh my gosh, the scenes between these two characters are just like so sickeningly sweet and cheesy, romancy. I was not a fan. I was not a fan. And one of the scenes where I stopped like reading it was a scene between these two characters. I was just like, oh my gosh. And I felt like this book did a lot of like, it told you things, but it didn't like actually demonstrate those things. And one of them is like our two main characters. It tells you repeatedly that they are, you know, they have been in a relationship a while. They have figured out how to communicate well with each other. They have really good communication with each other. And then like the conflict between the characters is because they don't communicate with each other. I don't know. This story was a lot. It was a lot. We also have our characters like setting up the building that they picked, that they're like, this is where the tea shop goes, is basically the main... Why are words so hard tonight? It's the headquarters of like this gang in this town, and they turn it into a tea shop and then just like decide to use the gang members. But they like in one conversation like convince these gang members that like, we are the leaders of your gang now. And it was just like super weird. Like, what is going on? That was my experience. I guess if you like cozy fantasy, you can give it a try. Next book I read was A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. So this is a reread, and I absolutely loved it. And it is as good as I remembered. So this is a cozy slice of life sci-fi. So I do like cozy books. This is about a main character who joins the crew of a ship that is punching holes through space. So that way you can get from point A to point B faster without it taking like as much time to get there. And she is like a new member on this crew, and she's hiding stuff about her past. And we basically see, it's kind of like a found family. I absolutely love the way every one of these characters were written. They were very well fleshed out, well-rounded. They had multiple aspects to their personality. They disagreed with each other, but they still decided to come together and work together, and it felt real. It felt like a family. So having this found family aspect that also very much felt like a family was great. I also absolutely love the world building in the Wayfarer series, and one of the examples of that is like the captain on the ship grew up on a spaceship, and spaceships have artificial gravity. So if you fall on a spaceship, the artificial gravity turns off so that way you don't get hurt. So whenever they are on a planet, he comments about how he does not like real gravity because you could literally fall to your death, or you could fall and get hurt. And that's scary to him because that's not something that he's grown up around. That's just, it feels different, even though this is a human character. So like, he's one of our humans. He just grew up in a different environment. So like, it was really well thought out how the characters would act in different environments. Like, if our main character grew up not on a planet, how would that affect our main character's view of a planet? So I love that. I love that part. And I feel that way with like all of the species, because we have like, this is a multi-species crew, and that also causes some conflict because the species handle things in life differently. And that can cause some conflict between them because, you know, there's just differences in their cultures, but it's really them like trying to work through all of that. And in this, we basically end up stopping at places like the home planets of different crew members and really getting to understand more about the crew members and their species and the way that species lives. So I absolutely loved it. I love this book. I will be rereading it. I will be rereading the rest of the Wayfarer series. Also rereading this after I've read Record of a Spaceborne Few, which is my favorite Wayfarers book that I've read like over and over again. There are so many things that are mentioned in this book that I feel like, oh, they're Easter eggs for Record of a Spaceborne Few, but this book was written first, and I love it. Yeah, this book was amazing. The last book I read was Dead Cattail Assassins, which I loved. I don't know if I'm doing a standalone review for this book, and I did a reading vlog for both Dead Cattail Assassins and The Will of the Many, which I'm currently reading, which I will be posting definitely after this video because I'm not finished filming for that reading vlog because I'm not finished The Will of the Many yet. So, Dead Cattail Assassins was fun. So this is a book where our main character is a zombie assassin. So whenever you die, you get to choose which deity you serve, and she decides to serve the goddess of assassins, which means her body gets resurrected and she gets to go assassinate people. But there are a lot of rules about assassinating people, and there's very strict boundaries, and then once one of these assassins takes on a job and they're like, yes, I agree to do this job, they have to complete the job. But of course, our main character runs into a snag where she no longer wants to complete the job. And I loved the way this book was written. The world building is great. We have set up things that are just like quirky setups in the beginning turn around to be plot relevant in the end, and you know, just like quirky things about the world, and then you're like, oh. And I love that about this book. Most of the dialogue felt natural, and it felt like we got the world building naturally, and these were things that the characters would normally say to each other. On top of that, I really liked our main character's no-nonsense attitude. So even though she runs into a snag and goes, I don't want to complete this job anymore, she still goes back to her boss and is like, so this happened, and that is not supposed to happen, and what do we do about it now? Because I'm not going to go through with this job because this thing happened. And I really like that she just, you know, straight up said it and didn't beat around the bush or run away or any of those things. Like, she just was like, how do we deal with this? Like, let's, you know, just face this head on. And that's really how, oh my gosh, that's totally how her character concludes her arc too. She's just gonna like face things head on, and she's not gonna shy away from the possible ramifications of her actions. And yeah, you know, I really like a main character who does that. I do have some criticisms for this book, and they basically all come down to the final scene. So my two criticisms for this book, one is there are times in books in general where like characters will whisper things to each other and they're like doing it and it's like only this other person could hear it and like no one else noticed that they were whispering to each other, but it doesn't actually make sense in the context of the story. And that was very much so the final scene of this book. Is we had like our main characters were basically on a stage and in a crowded room and everyone's looking at them, and then they were like, let me whisper this funny joke in your ear. And like, you know, it's perfectly fine. No one else knows what's going on. It's like, that doesn't seem like a natural time to be whispering things. And then we do have a being from the spirit realm in our final scene that is written in like a dialect or an accent, which means that like the words aren't written the same way they're written in standard English. And I really struggled to read those lines, and some of them I just did not understand. So that kind of pulled me out of the story right at the end, which is sad because like honestly by the time we got to our final scene I was like, this is a very satisfying final scene because, you know, our two main characters have had like, you know, connecting poignant moments throughout the story, and it just like all kind of like accumulates in this final scene that was like bittersweet. Yeah, it was good. It was good. I almost think I would like the audiobook of this one better just because I think I might understand the character who's like dialogue was written in a dialect. I think I would understand that character better, hopefully, in a audiobook or where I'm hearing the words read aloud rather than trying to like parse them while reading them. So yeah, that's Dead Cat Tail Assassins. I think this book could be a movie. It felt very vivid to me, and it felt like it could be like a action adventure comedy because the book, it was written like our characters are very witty in this book, and it was entertaining and I liked it. So that is my April wrap up. I do have two books that I'm carrying over to May. One of them is The Will of the Many. I'm probably about a third of the way through The Will of the Many, and I am really enjoying it. And the other book is A Shadow in Summer. So I started that one and I haven't quite finished it here by the end of April. So I will be carrying that into May. Let me know if you've read any of these, what your thoughts are on them, what you read, what your favorite book was that you read in April. And I hope to see you in another video. Happy reading!